Hi everyone, and welcome to Think Outside the Board. This is the May Game of the Month. In these videos I talk about my favorite games of the last month. And I've arranged the games into 3 categories. So the main category is generally new games, stuff that's coming in, that I'm playing for my channel. It could be Kickstarters that just delivered, it could be retail games that I just bought. So that's one category. Another category is reprints or later versions of games. This month, I don't have any of those. I don't have any reprints or later editions of games. I didn't play them in the month of May. So that takes 2 games out of the running right there. We start with possible 6. So a best and a runner-up. And then the third category is non-new games. So right now I am qualifying that by saying that the game has to be out at least 6 months. And then it gets pushed into the non-new game section. And the reason for that is I want to highlight some games that I'm still playing and getting to the table and enjoying that aren't the new shiny thing that has to be played. And I think it's good to feature those games that are kind of still standing up after some time. So those are my 3 categories. Today, as I already mentioned, there will not be any reprints or later editions of games. I do have a game of the month and a runner-up right here. You're seeing this is the game of the month, Merchant's Cove. And we're going to talk about this one at length a little bit because I think it's getting an unfair shake, in my opinion, from a lot of board game reviewers. I think actually that my estimation of the game is going up since I've played it last. So we're going to get to this. But before we do, we're going to have a runner-up game of the month. And then we're just going to have one game, so there won't be a runner-up in this category for the non-new game of the month. So 3 games this month will be featured, and the first one is going to be the non-new game of the month, and that is Josh Wood's Santa Monica. Now, Josh, very quickly in my mind, is becoming the go-to guy for very light games. I still have not played Tiny Towns. He did not design Tiny Towns, but he has designed all 2 or 3 of the expansions. And other than that, he's designed this, Santa Monica, and Cat Lady. And Cat Lady and Santa Monica are 2 of my favorite lighter games. I've talked before about how I'm more of a heavier gamer. I tend to want to collect and play a lot of heavy games. Still, though, I think it's very valuable to have light games in your collection. There's always opportunities to play light games, either maybe with friends who aren't gamers or lighter gamers. And my thing generally that keeps me away from a lot of lighter games is I feel like often there aren't really choices in lighter games for players to make. In other words, it often feels like the game is on rails and you're just doing maybe 1 or 2 things or 3 things. Sometimes there's really no choice involved. You're just like, well, I guess I'm playing this now. Well, I guess I'm spending this resource. Like, it's very obvious what you need to do. And I like choices in my games. I like strategy in my games. So what Josh has done in both Cat Lady and Santa Monica is he's taken very simple games that are beautiful and have a very high production quality for the light games that they are. So this is not a huge Kickstarter game. It's not amazing production quality in that sense. But the resources in this game are these chunky, screen-printed wooden resources. That's the same in Cat Lady. They feel very fun to hold and use in the game. Like it's just, they appeal to the tactile nature. So, I mean, Josh is making games that look amazing, feel amazing, and there's not that much in these games. My only really qualm with this, open this up to show you, because it is a lighter game. This is the box. That's a lot of wasted space right here. This is just all insert. I mean, you could easily fit everything that's in here in a much smaller game box. And this doesn't feel like the kind of game that's begging for a lot of expansions. So I don't know why they just didn't put it out in a smaller box, except that maybe they wanted to be able to stand up to bigger games in the game store. But that's not really honest with what it is. So just put it in a smaller box, I think. It would take up less room, and why not if you can? Why use more materials? That is my only problem with the game. Josh Wood has just designed some really great games, these 2 games, this and Cat Lady, which offer you choices, legitimately good choices in my mind. They're still light games. There's just engaging choices for you to make. Now, the way that this plays, essentially, it is a tableau builder. So you're kind of building a tableau of the Santa Monica beach. And I suppose this cover is not a bad representation because it looks kind of like there are two halves to this game. And there are two halves to your tableau. So you're going to be building one row of cards that is kind of like the water beach side, and then another row of cards that are the businesses and they kind of are street adjacent. And as you're building these cards, you're going to be looking for cards that as you play them will give you resources like sand dollars, or maybe give you some people that you want to get out on the beach so that you can move around. And then you're also going to be building groups of icons. So you'll have icons in a lot of the cards that might mean like, oh, here's a sporting goods store, so this has a sporting good icon. And there will be opportunities to create scoring goals for the end of the game, depending on how you place your cards out, that will give you points for creating groups of these icons. So kind of like a chain of one type of stores. It could be sports businesses, it could be local hotspots, it could be tourist areas, it could be waves. Some of the beach cards will have waves on them. So you're trying to link all these icons to score endgame points. So what you're doing each game is you're looking at this grid of 8 cards and you're going to choose one, you're going to take it, and you're going to play it in your tableau. And then once a player hits, I think, 14 cards in their tableau, the game will end. So you're just drafting cards and you're placing cards and you're trying to manage the people that you're putting on the cards. There will be opportunities to move them around sometimes, and you'll want to do that because many of the cards will have these scoring areas. And if you can move certain types of meeples into those scoring areas, you'll score points at the end of the game. And there are 3 types of meeples. You've got VIPs. You also have a mechanic where you'll have your VIP that you sort of start the game with. And as you walk places with the VIP, you'll put little footprint tokens out, and then you'll score points at the end of the game for all the places that your VIP visited. You also have locals and you'll have tourists. So different scoring areas that will appear on the cards will score, sometimes based on tourists, sometimes based on the locals, sometimes based on VIPs. Sometimes it doesn't matter. They'll take anything. But you're building this little tableau. So it's a simple game. The mechanics are fairly simple. But Josh Wood takes these games that have very similar mechanics you'll see in other games, whether it's, resource management and set collection. Those are usually kind of some of the standards on these lighter games, sometimes card drafting. And he layers good choices into these games. He literally gives you good choices to make. But he also keeps it very, very simple with a very friendly user interface, I guess. And so as you're playing these games, Cat Lady and Santa Monica, you've got choices to make, but it also feels very relaxing. And there's something about the design of the game too. So Josh I'm actually pointing to Cat Lady, which is over there on that shelf. But Josh himself did the art for Cat Lady. So in Santa Monica, he is a different artist, Jeremy Nguyen. But the design style is very similar to Josh's art and design. It's just very appealing, very colorful, and everything about this makes for such a fun game. Now, I may not have a million light games. That may not be the category game that I want to play the most. But the flip side of that is I'm always looking for the best lighter games. And so I think that when I find a really good one, I've cut through a lot of other stuff to find them. So if you're looking for some comparisons, some of my favorite lighter games, and I'm just going to read them off the shelf, which I'm looking at. Cat Lady is great. Santa Monica is great. Ryan Laucat's Rome. And Then We Held Hands is a fun little co-op light game. What else do I have over here that's really good? Patchwork is always good. If you're looking for a not too difficult card game that can play at a lot of different player counts, there's always Sushi Go. I like Dixit a lot. I mean, the gameplay on that is so light, but that's a very, very fun game that I think plays well off of people's personalities. Century Spice Road is another one. And then I could get in some other games, but I'm going to start to get a little heavier. But in my mind, those are maybe half a dozen of the best lighter games out there, and this is definitely in that company. So if you are looking for a light game, if you want something to be a filler, maybe a little bit more than a filler, but at least something that has good choices, I'd really recommend this. It is just so much fun to play, super chill, super easy. If you like card drafting, a little bit of spatial stuff going on. It's not worker placement, but you are moving some people around for endgame scoring. It's just, there's a lot of good stuff in here. And another lighter game might be something like, Dice Throne Adventures. This, I feel like, has a lot in common with Dice Throne Adventures. Not in gameplay, not in anything like that, but just in how appealing it is to look at, how appealing the components are, how smart the design is, yet simple at the same time. It's just firing on all cylinders. So Santa Monica is the non-new game of the month. I'm actually thinking of changing my non-new requirements so that it has to be at least a year old. And even by that standard, Santa Monica would still qualify. So if you're looking for another good, lighter game, and you like some of those mechanics I've described, mainly the card drafting, check this one out. Eventually I'll probably do a full teach. I don't think it's old enough that I'm not going to be doing a first impressions on it anytime soon, but it's a very easy, short, light game, so you should be able to go and just find a couple of videos. They probably won't be very long, maybe a few minutes each, and you can see it in action and see if you like it. But, in my light game collection, this is definitely in the top half dozen, easily. And from there, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it more. But this is a game that I would recommend to anybody that likes lighter games. It is great. Check out Josh Wood's other game too, Cat Lady. It's amazing. And realizing now that he has worked on all the Tiny Town expansions, it makes me want to go out and play Tiny Town, which I haven't done yet. Not everybody can play every game. There's too many games in the world for us to play every single game. So that is a hole in my game playing. And so if I plug that hole anytime soon, I will probably be plugging it with not just the base game, but those Josh Wood expansions, because Josh Wood is the man. He's awesome. Go out, support him, play his games so that he can make many more, because he will elevate the category of light board games beyond. Good designer, Josh Wood. Okay, from there, we're going to go to the runner-up game of the month. And the interesting thing here is that game, I actually rated a little bit higher than this game when I did my first impressions videos. Also, I'm not going to go into too much detail with these games, and I'm going to be talking about some specific things with each of them. So if you want more information, if you want to see how either of these two games are played, I have first impressions videos for both of them, and I'll probably link them in the end screen. So you can just jump over to either of those videos if you're interested in seeing more about Merchant's Cove or Maglev Metro. So Maglev Metro is essentially an engine builder, which is interesting because it's a train game, so there's a little bit of a wordplay, I guess, going on in there, right? An engine game that is an engine builder. So how does that work? Well, this is a train game. The subtitle here actually says Magnetic Levitation Rail. So it's a train game of sorts, and it's supposed to take place in a sort of futuristic subway world. And the cool thing about this game is that the board has two sides. So you can either play on the Manhattan side, which has this kind of big, funky central tile, which I'll talk about in a minute, or you can flip it to the other side, which is the Berlin side, and you don't have that big, funky tile. And that is the advanced side, the Berlin side. But the interesting thing is when they made this and the game came out and had two sides, I think everyone's mind first went to, well, does that mean that there are going to be more maps for the game, right? Because it's a train game, and most train games, they live and breathe by the number of map expansions, because some maps work better with small player counts, and some maps work better with larger player counts. And so you may want to choose the map based on the player count. This one right now just has two maps, and the game is for 1 to 4 players. There is a solo mode, so that's always a nice bonus, but it doesn't play up to like 6 players or anything like that. So it's 2 to 4. So they've got 2 maps in this base game, and they both play very well, and they're just kind of very well designed for all those player counts. But here's the cool thing. They actually just did announce that more maps are coming. So if you check out this game, if you like the game, if you buy the game and you play the game and you like the game, There are more maps on the way, and that is a very good thing for a train game. Okay, so what makes this different than a lot of other train games is that you are not picking up and delivering cubes. Instead, you are picking up and delivering people. And when you pick up and deliver those people, they will go onto your player board. And your player board is like this huge unlockable thing. One of the things is that you've got scoring cards. And in a normal game, you'll get 4 endgame scoring cards. You will be able to score one of those scoring cards. If you want to score the other 3, you need to put people on that area of the player board to unlock the ability to score those player cards. So that is a variability in the player board that could affect how you're playing it and how different people are playing it. And there is a lot like that in Maglev Metro, which is where I think it gets a lot of its strength. It just has a lot of variability built into the game. For instance, on your turn, you're going to do 2 actions each turn. However, there are spaces that you can unlock so that you can get up to 5 actions on a turn. That's a lot. That's 2.5 times what everyone else might be using. You've also got scoring at the end of the game for the various kinds of passengers. There are 4 colors of passengers. So you'll be able to put people on your board so that instead of getting maybe 1 or 2 points for some of those passengers at the end of the game, you'll get significantly more. There are also ways for you to upgrade the amount of points you'll get for the train links that you've built by the end of the game. So you normally score 1 point. If you fill out all those train link areas, you can get, I think, up to 4 points per train link at the end of the game. And then there's another section on the player board where if you want to be able to transport the different kinds of passengers or build the different kinds of passenger stations, you're going to need to unlock the ability to do that. And 2 of those passengers kind of serve as basic levels for more advanced passengers. So you'll actually need to do those colored passengers first to then unlock the kind of higher level scoring passengers. So you can't get to them without going through the lower level passengers. And then finally, you have all these actions that you can do on your turn. Things like building track, taking your train from one station to another station, building a station, picking up passengers, dropping off passengers, just your train capacity. So all of these things will start at 1. And then as you put things on the board, you will be able to upgrade the amount of thing that you can do with each of those actions every turn. And so everyone theoretically is going to be building their player board and their engine differently. There are a couple things you may not even need on the player board, like there is just one unlockable where you can run your train in reverse. And the reason for that is if you are driving your train in a certain direction, you're not allowed to turn around until you hit the end of the line, and then you can kind of turn around and come back. Now, if you're building things and planning things with that in mind, you'll probably be okay. But you never know. You could hit an oh shit moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I need to turn this train around immediately. So if you've placed a little robot on the board, you can unlock that ability. There's another one where you can unlock the ability to move around the people that you've already placed on your player board. Maybe something empowered you really early on in the game to do something, maybe to pick up and drop off passengers. And then maybe later in the game, you don't need that anymore. So maybe you want to move those things around to help you with endgame scoring instead. Now, I said robots. You're like, wait a minute, we were talking about passengers and now you're talking about robots. And the reason is, yes, there are 4 different colored passengers. There are also 3 different colored robots, which I think thematically is supposed to tie into this feeling a little bit futuristic and the fact that it's taking place on magnetic rails. So you will be moving robots around your train board as well. And they kind of serve as the intro level passenger delivery construct that you're working with. So generally, you have the ability to move these robots. There are gold, bronze, and silver in the game to kind of move them around and transport them. And as you deliver them, you'll use those robots to upgrade your player board. And then later on, you'll be able to access the passengers. And then you'll start taking passengers around as well. Now, in general, the passengers will help you with endgame scoring and unlocking other stations and other colored passengers, where the robots are the thing that will help you to increase your actions, the things that you do on your turn to make them more powerful. So that was all quite a mouthful that I just went through, but I mean, that should communicate that there is a lot going on in Maglev Metro, choice-wise. There are lots of ways for you to do things. I think the more you play the game, and I've started to notice this, it does start to feel a little bit samey. And even though I like the look of the board, it tends to feel a little bit dull and kind of blend together. One thing is these metal robots. There's yellow, gold, and bronze. The bronze and the gold look a little bit too close, I think, for comfort, especially with some of the gold and bronze icons on the player board. I think they needed something else. And if you're colorblind, that may be a little bit of a problem. I would recommend maybe marking the little robot people in some way to distinguish them. The passengers also, I think they made the bad decision of making them like salmon and red, like a pink and a red, and then like a lavender and a dark purple. So again, maybe they should have gone with 4 different colors. I think the idea is that they wanted the pink and the red because the pink unlocks the red and the lavender unlocks the purple. So there is a thematic reason for the colors to be close. But if you're playing with colorblind people, that could potentially be a problem. I'm not sure how much people have problems with a lighter and darker version of the same color. Obviously, it's a different problem than, say, confusing something like blue and green. But if that is an issue, just something to be aware of. One other little quibble with the game, there are these little plastic tiles that you put out for train tracks, and they're really, really cool. They're designed differently, so every color has a track on a different space of the tile. So you can actually stack these tiles on top of each other as people are building track on the board. And because they're clear, you will get to see all of the tracks kind of on different spaces in the tile. So nobody's ever going to be blocking somebody else from building a tile. In that sense, the design is genius. And it's also very cool because as you're building out this map, it will end up looking like a subway map. And it's just neat. It's kind of fun and engaging that it looks that way. The one problem with these tiles, though, is that they slot into the board and they fit pretty tight. And the stations that you're building are like this really thick, maybe like 18 levels of cardboard. And the board itself is recessed. So some of this will go down into the board and some of it will stick up above. But it almost looks like 2 different pieces of cardboard that were kind of glued together. And sometimes they're not quite in line with each other. So this top piece might be shifted off the recessed spot it's in just a little bit, which means that as you're putting in these tracks, they may not sit totally flush if you've completely filled out the board with all of these tiles. So it's just, again, a little fiddly thing to be aware of. It's not a huge deal, but they don't fit as perfectly as you'd like to with a board that's completely filled out. Very, very minor quibble. So Maglev Metro is designed by Ted Alspach, and it's distributed by Bezier Games, which is his company. And if you're not familiar with that name, he's designed all of the Werewolf and Ultimate Werewolf games, which are hugely popular filler games. But he also designed Suburbia and the Castles of Mad King Ludwig. And Maglev Metro, I think, fits in well with those 2 games, very well. Because like those games, there is some amount of tile placement. And also like those games, there's a lot of variability in gameplay and in strategy and in the way that you can employ tactics to achieve those strategies and then alter those tactics if other players are doing things in the game that kind of, are going to become problematic for you, or if your gameplay moves in a certain situation so that you want to switch tactics a little bit and do something else. I think all of those games allow you to do that very well. They're smartly designed and they allow for a lot of kind of adjustment during the game by the players in terms of what they're doing. So this is just a very, very, very solid game. I recognized that when I did my first impressions. I've played it a couple times, and I think I initially gave it like an 8.5. I think for me, the more I think on it, I think that score is coming down a little bit. It's still a really solid game, and when those other maps come out, that might drive my score back up again. But there's something about the game, just looking within the kind of visual design that it is, I can't help thinking that it looks a little bit drab to me. And that also, as well designed as it is, I think the more you play it, the gameplay is going to be a little samey. I think as they bring out more and more of the maps, that should help with that. But I think my score is going to go down from an 8.5 to, I don't know, maybe let's say it's at a 7.5, and it could go back to an 8 or 8.5 once the maps come out, if they really add more kind of gameplay, or if they do things that actually like re-enliven the gameplay in a different way. But it is a really good game, a really solid game that I think most players should enjoy playing, from lighter players to heavier players. I just think there are a lot of good choices for players to be making in this game. And it's just a really solid game. So you shouldn't think twice about picking this one up, especially if you like train games, and especially if you like engine builders. It is both of those things, and it's a good one. And it's also different from other train games because of what it does with its pickup and delivery and that kind of engine building on the player board. So, runner-up of the month. That brings us back to Merchant's Cove. Merchant's Cove is mainly designed by Carl Van Ostrand. This is his first big game. He had help on development by Johnny Pack, who is a designer that I'm really starting to like a lot. He did Coloma, and he's got a lot of stuff in the pipeline. And Drake Villarreal, who is sort of I think one of the main kind of in-house designers, developers at Final Frontier Games. Now, Final Frontier Games has put out Cavern Tavern, Rise to Nobility. I'm pretty sure they did Johnny Pack's Coloma, a version of that. They also had a Kickstarter that I think should be delivering soon called Monsters on Board, which seems to share some things with this in terms of like a player board that you do a lot of stuff on. So Final Frontier has put out some solid games, and I think they were looking at Merchant's Cove to kind of take them to their next level. Because while they have put out a bunch of solid games, they haven't had that one game that everyone's going to play, that's just going to be an unbridled success and people are going to be flocking to. And I think they really thought that it was going to be Merchant's Cove. And it should be Merchant's Cove. And I'm going to tell you why that it should be Merchant's Cove and why more people should be playing this game. Now, the design, those three guys, they worked really well together. I would welcome future titles from the three of them working together. I think what this game captures more than anything is just a pure sense of joy and fun and everything that people really like about board gaming. The art on here is by the Miko, and if you've played like Raiders of the North Sea, any of the North Sea games, or the West Kingdoms, or a lot of the Final Frontier games he's worked on, also the Valeria Card Kingdoms game, the Miko makes amazing art. It's just very cartoony, often fantasy themed, and I love his art. He's one of my favorite artists out there. So you've got just this really great design by these three different guys working together, and you've got great art by the Miko. And component-wise, there's so much to recommend this as well. You've got a lot of really brightly colored screen printed meeples that look fantastic. You've got these cardboard boats that you have to pre-assemble, but once you do, they sit out there on the game board, and kind of the main part of the strategy of the game focuses around these boats and trying to put certain kinds of meeples into the boats. And the boats themselves are fun. They're like a great little showpiece on the table. They look great. The whole board looks great. Is this thing getting played that much? Are people loving it? I don't know. I don't know, because we're still in the pandemic. There are not a lot of board game groups meeting right now. And so it's hard to get a gauge and see if this is getting played behind closed doors or who's playing it. But this is something that I would expect to see at a lot of board game groups, because I think it's one of those games that kind of can bridge a lot of complexity levels. So, heavier gamers can play this, and they have choices to make, and they should be engaged, but it's not so much that it should go over lighter gamers' heads. And I feel like there's a little bit of a worry out there about this, and I'm going to address that in just a second as well. So let's talk about the reception of the game first. I know Dice Tower reviewed it, and they did their 4 Squares review, and the only one who really liked the game was Mike DeLizio, and he seemed a little shocked that the other 3 gave it not great scores. I mean, like 5s to 7s maybe. And I think those scores, in my opinion, are really below what this game should be getting. Those scores are beneath this game, for sure. I'm going to talk about one thing that Tom Vasel said, and then I'm going to talk about some things that some other reviewers said, but everything else I'm going to talk about very generically, because I don't need to badmouth or burn other reviewers. I just kind of want to address some of the conclusions that they've concluded, okay? So the one thing I will say, though, is that Tom Vasel got very, very, I think, focused on the player boards in this and thinking that it would be very difficult to teach people. I don't think that it would be difficult to teach people, but maybe if you're Tom Vasel and most of your board game playing is with groups of random strangers at all the conventions that he goes to, maybe in that situation, yeah, he doesn't want to have to do a full table teach every time. Maybe Tom wants to just sit down and teach something that he can teach in 5 seconds and go. And so I would understand that. But in his critique of this, he seemed to kind of get hung up on those player boards and how difficult that they might be to play or to teach. And they're not very difficult. And that seemed to then stop him from focusing on the main board and the main strategy of the game, which are those boats. So as you're playing this, you've got kind of a little time track at the bottom of the board. And the way a time track works, in case you don't know, is that whoever's last is going to go. So if someone is kind of lagging behind, they will get to take maybe several turns until they catch back up. So it's kind of a leapfrog style turn order. And whoever's last just gets to keep going until they catch up. So as you're taking those kind of turns and you're paying in time and you're going around this clock, you're going to pass some of these icons every once in a while. And each time a player does that, they're going to take some meeples out of a bag and place them in these 6 boats. The reason that they're doing that is they're also making goods. So it's called Merchant's Cove. So every player has a player board. They're going to be doing different things on them, but they're all going to be making some kind of goods in 4 different colors: blue, yellow, green, and red. And they're also going to be selecting meeples from bags to put into boats. And when a boat fills up, it'll get to go to a dock. And then once it's docked, no other boats can dock there. So you're starting the game with 6 boats. 4 of them are going to dock at the end of every round, which means 2 partially filled boats will not dock. So there is this game going on, this area majority game going on, where you're trying to put the people you want, the colors that you want, into the boats, and then move those boats to the docks that you want them to go into, because some of those docks represent larger goods, some of them represent smaller goods, some of them represent black market goods, which if you want to trade with that, you're going to have to pay a penalty, but you may be able to get some trading done there that you wouldn't get to do on the other docks. So players are kind of seeding these boats and then using the boats to seed the docks, and then they're going to get money when they sell their goods. Now, at the same time, they're putting meeples into the boats that aren't getting docked, because those boats are going to fill faction halls that will then score you end game points at the end of the game. That is a game in itself. It is a simple game, but you could play just that game without all these player boards. And the world is full of lighter games, right? So there's no reason to discount that. That is a legitimate game with a legitimate mechanic that has choices that are engaging choices. So, Tom Vasel just blew past all of that, didn't acknowledge any part of that game, and was only focusing on the player boards. And I love the player boards. They're a lot of fun, but they are there to then supplement the main part of the game. Okay, so here are some things I've heard other reviewers say about this. Other reviewers were comparing this to Root. It is true that both Root and Merchant's Cove have player boards where each player is going to essentially be playing a mini game and kind of doing their own thing. But they're very different games that I think are targeting very different audiences. Root is, yes, a very complex game, and it's a direct conflict game. It's essentially a war game with cute animals, and it's got these kind of complex mechanics. The player boards in Merchant's Cove are nowhere near that complicated. Everybody has 2 of the same actions. One of them is to take a card from a market row of sort of villagers. Another one is to activate all the villagers you've already taken. Then each player board has maybe 3 to 5 actions that are specific to them, which have to do generally with the creation of goods. So if you're playing with the blacksmith, it's going to be about taking dice and putting them in certain places to get a high number to make one kind of goods, or putting them in another place to get a low number to make a second kind of goods. And there's a couple other things in there. But it's something that an experienced gamer should be able to sit down and look at and probably figure it out themselves in 3 to 5 minutes. There are even these kind of thin little rule books for each one. You should be able to hand that to someone and have them understand it within a couple minutes. It's not that difficult. Now, if you want to be very thorough, if you're teaching like new people the very first time, maybe people that don't play games, by all means, yeah, kind of explain all the player abilities to everybody and how they work, the different player boards. It's not that difficult. And I think if you've played this game a few times, if you've played each character in the game a couple times, you should not have a problem with that. Okay, so it's not really that complicated a game. It's a much lighter game. I saw some reviewers who were very confused and thought it was going to be a much heavier game. I just don't understand that, because I think it was very clear in the Kickstarter the kind of complexity level of the game. I've seen other reviewers talk about this, the Secret Stash. This has a lot of extras for the game, including solo mode. And there have been reviewers that are unhappy that this wasn't part of this game. Sure, okay. I mean, it'd be great if it was thrown in there. But, I mean, have you ever looked at an Aeon's End Kickstarter? Every single one of those Kickstarters takes all of the stretch goals and puts them in a separate box. So Final Frontier Games is not doing anything different with Merchant's Cove that they don't do with every Aeon's End campaign or many, many other games out there. There were also complaints about the solo mode being in here, but look at In the Hall of the Mountain King. I mean, when they did their retail version, they put their solo mode, Cursed Mountain, in a separate box. So, I mean, these are valid criticisms, I guess. It's just weird to me that they're being made at this game as if this game is the only one doing it, when it's, I don't want to say industry standard, but it's commonplace. So I don't know why someone's getting hung up on either of those things. I will say, though, that I think there are a half dozen kind of very prominent content creators that I think gave this a lower rating than maybe Final Frontier Games was expecting, and certainly lower than I was expecting, and I think certainly lower than this game deserves. So out there right now, you have that, right? You have those people who are kind of not loving the game. And then I think you've got the lighter gamers and the kind of like family gamers who are looking at this and they're hearing these stories about how difficult the player boards are. And so I imagine there's some hesitancy and there's some trepidation, thinking like, well, I don't want to get this big game that's going to be so difficult to play with my family, where every time we play a different character, we have to learn a new mechanics that might be too much for our family. Folks, it is not that difficult, really. It's really not that difficult. You'll figure it out. And in fact, that's the audience that I really want to talk to and appeal to with this. Because I think Final Frontier Games, I wish they were doing some kind of, outreach message, I guess. Because you've got 4 characters in this base game, plus you've got the peddler, which is the character that if you're playing solo, you will play against the peddler. In this stretch goals box, you've also got a secret character called the thief, and then there are 3 more characters in expansions, each one sold separately: an oracle, the innkeeper, and the dragon rancher. So if you're curious about this game, just don't worry about those 3 expansions for right now, but pick up this. You've got 4 characters plus the peddler, and pick up this, which will give you the extra thief character, but more importantly, it will give you the solo mode and a lot of other stuff. A lot of stuff. And unlike those reviewers who seem to be confused that there was so much stuff in this box and they seem to not know how to process it, I'll tell you that it's a good thing. There's a lot of variability in this box. Now, there's a thing called reviewer drift, I think, which is that a lot of times reviewers review something really well, because it's kind of the new shiny and they need to get reviews made, right? They're trying to have a career where they talk about as many games as they can, they review as many games as they can, and they do this for people, so people will have content out there. But when they're doing that, when they're riding that kind of review conveyor belt, that means they're going to blow through games maybe more quickly than they should. And I think this is where Merchant's Cove got the short end of the deal, because while nothing in here is overly complicated, there is a lot of content. And there's more than you're going to be able to get experience with or be able to talk about after playing this game 2 or 3 times. You need to play through every character. You need to really kind of play the stuff in this secret stash. And this is important, and this is a good thing, and you should be picking this up. So, in this box, you've got, remember the boats I was talking about that you put people in? You've got extra boats in this box, like 3 different boats. They're different sizes, so they're going to change up variability in the game. And then there are also these boat cards that will tell you, if you use them randomly, which boats to use, combine with the boats in here, and where to place them on the board. So that's going to add a lot of variability into the game. There's also this thing called the rogue card. So when you're putting these meeples into boats, there's yellow, blue, green, and red, but there are also black ones. Black ones are bad. They will give you corruption. It will cost you points at the end of the game. Now, thematically kind of going along with that are these rogue cards, and you'll put one on the board every game, and it will just have some condition about how the boats get filled. So in this game, there's only 3 rogue cards, and it doesn't really give a lot of variability to the game. If you get this, there are like 12 more of these rogue cards, and the conditions of them are wildly different, and they're going to make the game very different. So that's another thing that's in here. Now, there's also a huge solo mode. You've got 12 different scenarios. 3 of them are linked into a little mini campaign. And a lot of those solo scenarios will use different rogue cards, but they'll also use a lot of the other stuff in this stash, some of which I'm still going to talk about. And so that will just give you more variability. Look, really good solo mode, really deep with a lot of variability with all this stuff. Also, in Merchant's Cove, one of the things I talked about is you can get these merchant cards from a display that will come into your player board. There are, I think, 3 different sets of merchant cards in here. There are at least 3 more in here. So again, the solo mode will tell you which merchant cards to use, but for any game you want, you can choose which of these 6 different decks to combine. Maybe you use 2. In most games, they want you to use 2. You could throw all 6 in if you wanted. There are also faction halls that you're going to put meeples in to score points at the end of the game for endgame scoring. This gives you another little kind of module where the faction halls get replaced with these more powerful faction halls that will score more points at the end of the game for the right person if they're able to win it. So that's another thing in here. I mean, there's other stuff I don't even want to kind of go into too much, but there are kind of like these dark goods that you'll use in some of the modules. There's another module with a mechanic on the island kind of in the middle of the boats. There's a lot of stuff in here. And there is a very, very deep, very complete, one of the best solo modes I've ever seen. So if you like solo gaming, get this, but get this with it. You're going to get a lot of game in there. Just dispelling some of those things that kind of board game reviewers have been saying about, like, oh, I don't like that this is in here, or this is in here, or, oh, I don't like that player boards seem too complicated to have to teach, which I don't really agree with. Here's who this game is for and should be for. People who like Lords of Waterdeep. People who like Raiders of the North Sea. Either of those 2 games, get this. Get this game. It's good, okay? And what I see with people who, play Lords of Waterdeep, it's a lot of lighter gamers. It's a lot of families. And they play Lords of Waterdeep a lot. People who like Lords of Waterdeep play Lords of Waterdeep a lot. There's one expansion for Lords of Waterdeep, Scoundrels of Skullport, which I actually haven't played. I hear it makes it better. But that's it. Your game's not changing that much. If you're the kind of person who plays Lords of Waterdeep and you play it 20, 50, 100 times in a year, get Merchant's Cove. Because when you're playing this with your family and you start to get a little bored of it, you can play a different character. You've got 4 different characters in this box. You've got another character in here. You've got 3 other characters you can buy if you go out and get those expansions. You've got all this stuff, all these modules that you can put into this game that you can add a lot of variability for. This is a game that you can get with your family, and you're gonna be able to play this thing for a year or two every single week if you want, and change it up, and it's gonna stay fresh for you. So there is so much possibility and so much gameplay in this box, and I wanna circle back to the fact that it looks awesome. It looks fun. It's got great table presence with those boats. It's colorful. It's got great meeples. The board design is awesome. You've got Miko art. This is the kind of game that you should get with your, if you have a family, and play this all the time. And yeah, if there's a couple of little rules on player boards that you're not remembering, you'll figure it out. You'll look in the rules. Another family member will remember it, the one who played that character last maybe. It's not that difficult. It's not that difficult as some reviewers seem to be making it out to be, because I think they're blowing through playing it and getting the review done before they've really had time to assess everything, which means that because they're not understanding everything, and it's not because it's complicated, it's just because they haven't taken the time to kind of learn it all or sift through it. But this is not Anachrony, folks. This is not Tricarion. This is not a game that should have this huge barrier to entry because it's that difficult to play. It is a fun, light game that has some variability in how the player abilities work, so that you're going to be able to play it for a very long time, and it's not going to go stale for you. It's going to have a lot of variability, and that is the very reason that you should rush out and buy it and play it and not be scared off. Merchant's Cove is the May game of the month. It's a great game. When I first scored it, I think I scored it around, I said 7.5. This is one of those games, a lot of movies you watch and you just go in and you enjoy it, or you don't, and you leave and you never think about it again. And then some movies you go and you think about it later. Merchant's Cove is a game that I've been thinking about a lot. And not because it's complicated. My brain isn't trying to understand it in that way. My brain is thinking about it just because it's so much fun and it's so bright. And it is the reason that board games exist, I think. And this is something that, as more and more people are getting vaccinated and COVID restrictions are being relaxed, this is something I want to play with a lot of different groups. I think it's going to bring joy to a lot of different people. That's what this game is. It's joy in a box. Don't push it away. Don't push it away when a few well-known board game reviewers have weird hang-ups about it. Give it another chance. Look around. Play it. Maybe you can play it at a board game cafe or in a meetup group when they start getting together, but give it a chance because it may very well be something that you really want. If you are the kind of board gamer that's into Raiders of the North Sea, Lords of Waterdeep, I think you're going to like this. I really do. And I don't want to see people being scared away from it just because reviewers are giving it a mediocre review and then kind of just running on to the next game without really giving this thing a full look. It's not fair to the game. So for me, this is climbing back up. I'd say it's probably about at an 8.5 now. And the reason that it's going up is I am realizing how much stuff is in this box and how much variability it has and how good all the solo scenarios are. Now, I didn't make this video and make this my game of the month because I felt like I wanted to say something about it and set things right, although I'm kind of doing that now, or trying to do that to some degree. But the only reason that this is featured as my May game of the month is because it is a great game and it is my May game of the month. Thank you very much for watching. If it's your first time here, please consider liking and subscribing. I will be back with more content very soon. You will see a first impressions video coming up this week from me for Curious Cargo, another one for Merv. Hopefully by the end of the week, if I can get it all done, one for Kanban EV. And then probably around the weekend, you will see another Kickstarter update, which will cover the first half of July. So all of that is on the way this week. Content is coming. I hope you're having a great week and playing games in whatever way you can these days. Take care. See you soon.